Do Chris Nolan films sound bad? Is there a problem with movies such as The Odyssey having intentionally poor audio where it's either too loud, the dialogue is buried under too much atmosphere, and it's either an oppressively uncomfortable experience or an experience where audiences can't follow the dialogue or understand the story because they can't hear what's going on clearly?
Powerful agents to the uninitiated.
I think Chris Nolan has something to answer for, because it's not just The Odyssey that I've seen reports for about poor audio. It's common in many of his recent films that people have described them as either being too loud or the dialogue incomprehensible. I don't know the reasons why Chris Nolan's films have this issue, but I have some suspicions as a person that's mixed films myself. And I've also worked at a broadcaster in the technical department while we dealt with the sound of television programs and films. People complained more about sound problems than they did about anything else. And the reason is because poor sound is really alienating. If an audience can't understand what's going on or can't follow the dialogue, then they're not going to be able to enjoy the program. And if someone has any hearing difficulties or needs a hearing aid or has tinnitus, then if the audio is not perfect, it's really disadvantaging them as an audience. I come from a position that I think sound should be as clear and as crisp as you can make it, because you don't know how good your audience's hearing is going to be, and you also don't know the circumstances they're watching the film. He has often stated that the reason why his films are the way they are is a creative choice. He wants them to be loud and impressive because that's more immersive. His approach is if the audience is straining to hear what's going on, then they're paying attention. Then they're not being spoon-fed. They're having to work harder. And I get that. So basically, filmmakers are often trying to tread a fine line with an audience. That they don't want to hand them everything on a plate and make everything too obvious. They want them to sort of work a bit for the information. They have to listen and pay attention. But if you make it too confusing or there's too much dialogue lost,
then you have my permission to die.
So although Chris Nolan is making a creative choice, my thought of his creative choice is louder is better. It's basically the creative choice of a teenage metal guitarist. That what we lack in talent, we make up in sheer volume.
2, 11. Look. Right across the board.
The more is more argument. If we just keep cranking the volume, it'll be more impressive. But the problem with that is, if you keep cranking the volume on a 2-hour plus movie, all you're giving is everyone a headache. And I wonder if he gave himself a headache when he was mixing the film. And maybe that's the problem, because when you listen to loud sounds for a very long period of time, your ears become fatigued. So I wonder if maybe during the long hours of mixing a film, they keep cranking the volume because their ears get tired and tired. And what you're supposed to do is take lots and lots of regular breaks and sort of get second opinions and check your meters and come back. But if they didn't, they could just be blasting their ears out in the dubbing theatre, cranking the volume and getting used to that loud volume. But then when a normal audience sees it in a theatre, flipping heck, this is super loud. As a director, you become over familiar with the material. If you were involved in the writing of the script, you were on set when it was being filmed, by the time you get to the mix, you know the script completely. You know every word. So it's very hard to put yourself in the shoes of your audience. And I think often as filmmakers, we understand our films really well, but we don't know if the audience understands things. So the temptation might be we can bury this dialogue a bit because it's obvious. I know what's going on. The story makes sense to me. But Chris Nolan's not watching the film from the perspective of an audience. He's watching it from the perspective of a person who knows it too well. So for him, it's fine to bury the dialogue and obscure some detail because it just makes the film more interesting. But if you're watching for the film first time, you'll just be confused. So there's that element. The other element of mixing a film is that often, they are mixed in dubbing theatre. So a dubbing theatre is basically like a cinema with a mixing station in the middle. So you sit in a big cinema with excellent speakers and do the mix for your film. You want it to sound in the dubbing theatre as close to the theatrical experience. The problem with the dubbing theatre is often it's an idealised theatrical experience. They sound a lot better than either the cinemas people are viewing the film on or domestic speakers. Like most people might be watching the film at home on their television or on a laptop or an iPad, and the speakers there won't be very good comparatively. Or even most cinemas won't have ultra high-end equipment. I mean, some IMAX cinemas do, but lots of middling cinemas will just have middling quality speakers. So if you mix so your film sounds amazing on state-of-the-art, brilliant, perfect speakers, it doesn't mean that your mix will sound amazing on average to terrible speakers or the kind of speakers the rest of us listen. And that's a common, well-known problem. In music mixing, a lot of music studios use these speakers called the Yamaha NS10 monitors. Now, these monitors are famously not very good. And why would you mix your sound on bad speakers? Well, the reason you do it is because these NS10s are fairly equivalent to what most people will have at home. And if you can make your mix sound good on bad speakers, then your mix sounds good everywhere. A lot of people would take their record mix and play it back on car stereos because most people listen to music in car stereos, so it needs to sound good in there. I wonder if they're focusing their mix just on the high-end experience. And the mix sounds good in IMAX theaters, it sounds good in high-end places, but everywhere else, maybe there's not the same attention to detail. So I personally think the reason why there's an ongoing issue is it's a mixture of a bit Chris Nolan's personal taste, perhaps the circumstances in which they are mixed, and also perhaps that because he's often producer, writer, director, person that's involved in every stage, he's trying to make the audience work hard, but it backfires. And finally, Chris Nolan is Chris Nolan. It's very hard for someone to say you're wrong because he's often right. Like the choices Chris Nolan makes in films make hundreds of millions of dollars. Like he's eminently a successful filmmaker. So who's the person that's going to go up to me like, actually, Chris, I don't think you're right about this sound mix. Like, I mean, yeah, I know you were right about everything else and your films are super successful. Like it could be like he's a victim of his own success. And unfortunately, the negative reaction to that is it alienates a lot of viewers. And as though you could argue that the visceral, loud experience is exciting.
Turn it up! Turn it up!
I personally think films should try to be as inclusive as possible with their sound design. I'm not saying like you can't have loud moments, but it has to be done with a bit of nuance. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the topic, so let me know if you're on board with Chris Nolan's sound design or if you think actually there are problems.